This is Marketing from the Front Lines, where we speak with B2B marketers who are in the trenches, bringing technology to market. Here's your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines.io.
Hey, everyone, and thanks for listening. Today, we're speaking with Linda Watkins, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Edge Impulse. Linda, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I've had about 700 guests on all the different podcasts that I host, and you're the very first one who's ever worked at a flute factory, or at least the ones that have told me that. So let's talk about flute factories. What was going on there?
Yeah, I have a very unusual career path to marketing, but for my undergrad and a graduate degree, I studied flute performance. And so I love music, obviously. And I ended up working at a flute factory in Boston, making flutes and piccolos for 4 years until I realized I didn't make very much money as a flute maker. So I went back to school, got an MBA, and ended up in the tech world in Bay Area, California.
And then how'd you end up in marketing specifically, or what was it about marketing that really caught your attention?
Well, my first kind of job right out of MBA was in finance. And the reason I did that is when I started my MBA, I thought it was a huge career switch from music and instrument manufacturing to then business or tech. So I chose finance at first because I thought, well, I need to understand the language of business. And if I can read income statements, balance sheets, then that is the language of business. So that's why I started out at Cisco for 3 years in a finance role supporting marketing. What was good about that is I was learning more about marketing at the same time. And I realized finance doesn't have a lot of creativity to it. If you're too creative in finance, that will get you fired. So I learned more about marketing, and thankfully I was in a role that I could switch over to the marketing organization at Cisco. And then I did that for about 3 years until I decided, I really love marketing because not only can I do the creative work, but it's also analytical. Kind of hits both those sides for me. And then I went into startups, which I've never really looked back from there. When I started working at a startup in San Francisco, I thought, okay, this is where I want to be. You could do so much, have such a big impact, and be very creative in marketing for a startup.
Yeah, it looks like you made that shift in 2014, and then there was a small stint at AWS. But apart from that, you've been all in on startups for basically the last decade. What do you think it takes to succeed in startups in marketing?
Experimentation. And, I was having a conversation with a counterpart at another startup, and he said something really insightful. And he said, most of what we do as marketers fails. So you have to kind of get used to failing, learning, iterating, and trying again. That I think is really important to have that growth mindset if you're working in marketing at a startup, because you're working with constraints. You never have unlimited budget or people, of course. You have a very tight budget. You only have a couple people on your team, maybe, and you have to figure out how to make the most out of the resources you have. And also, how do you market something that's totally new? I always go back to the basics. Who are you talking to? What do they care about? What are their pain points? And then experiment.
What's an experiment that you recently ran that you thought was going to be successful and it wasn't?
Oh, at my current company, we started doing webinars. Webinars sound very basic and boring. So you have to find a way to make them exciting. And that basically is just figuring out what is the message that's really going to resonate with your audience. So we started these virtual events or webinars about a year ago. And one of the first ones we did, we got the messaging just right. And we got over 3,000 people registered for the webinar, which is very large for a webinar at a startup. Not all of our webinars have been as successful, but we learn as we go. It's like getting the right person, the right speaker, getting the right message, and making sure you're communicating that message well is just back to the basics. I think a lot of startup marketers can forget those basics because you may be chasing after something that seems new or interesting. But if you're not remembering that you're always speaking to your target audience, you're speaking to someone, even if you're in B2B, people and individuals buy software, services, products. You're always talking to an individual.
What's the key to getting webinars right? I do a lot of webinars. I've experimented with them, and I'm getting in the hundreds and the low hundreds, not the high hundreds.
Sure.
How did you pull it off? How are you making those so successful?
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, of course, getting the topic right, but make it as engaging as you can. Like in the webinar, there's lots of tools in different webinar platforms. You can do polls and questions and surveys. It's so easy. I find myself sometimes joining a webinar and just tuning out. It's just easy to do that and start multitasking. So I find ways to engage the audience once they're there and make it more of a discussion and answering questions live, making sure there's a chat going on behind the scenes as well helps a lot.
Are you doing LinkedIn Live or are you doing a different webinar platform?
Right now we're using Bizibo. It's actually a hybrid for in-person and virtual events, but you can just do virtual events with it too.
How many of those are you doing every quarter?
We do one a month.
Oh, one a month.
Quarter. Yeah.
Nice. And do they always have guest speakers or does it just depend on the topic?
Well, we always have, actually, I would say 90% we have guest speakers. There's only been a couple where we have done it ourselves and it's just internal team for our team, meaning the speakers are just our team.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And given your time working with so many startups, I'm sure you're working closely with founders. I know founders can be very, very difficult to work with. What have you learned about working with founders and what advice would you have for other marketers who are working closely with founders?
Sure. I've worked with quite a few founders. One even, wanted to argue with me and say that he didn't need priorities because we were going to do everything, which, I guess if you have unlimited funds, you can do that, which we did not have. So, founders are great, but also challenging to your point. And one thing that I found works well is, you may lose a battle, but you can still win the war. In other words, if you bring something to a founder, it's a good idea and they reject it, okay, kind of recoup and then return to that topic again later. Many times I've had to, frankly, kind of plant the seeds of what I feel like is a good strategy, a good approach, and let the founder kind of mull that over for a little bit. And then I come back and have another discussion. Then I come back and have another discussion if needed. So, it's just kind of finding what points you can really emphasize with that founder that they care about, that resonates with them. Founders can be very young, they can be super experienced, but most of the time, if they're a founder and they've done the work of getting funding, they're super confident in themselves, which is great, but it can give you challenges if they don't know marketing or marketing best practices. So I'd say just be persistent and keep kind of beating that drum of what you know is the right thing to do. Then most of the time, the founder will eventually come along.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
And if we just take a step back, let's talk about, some of your inspirations in your marketing career. Who would you say is the most inspirational, either brand or marketer for you?
Yeah, that's a hard one for me because I find bits and pieces of inspiration everywhere. So to name a couple, Apple's brand is incredible and amazing. Their marketing team, the way they coordinate their launches, it's amazing. That's world class for sure. There's also, on a totally opposite end of the spectrum, there are kind of these scrappy startups that market to technical developers that also do a really good job about being very authentic. It kind of makes me laugh that I'm mentioning this, but Hugging Face, because I don't know if you know them, but their logo is actually the emoji of the Hugging Face emoji. It's ridiculous. If you ever thought, I'm going to design a logo, you would never design that logo. But yet they understand their audience and it's all about developers and community. And it doesn't really matter if it's like this really finely tuned logo. In fact, that's maybe frowned upon a little bit, but authenticity and being unique is valued there. So, you can curtail your marketing, of course, for your audience. You should do that. But I kind of pull inspiration from many different brands.
Yeah, I like that Hugging Face is not boring. I think that's what every
Yes.
brand is up against is like just being boring. And they've definitely taken a different approach there, which I think it's not easy to do in B2B tech.
Right. And I think the key there is that you need to be authentic. Like you have to represent your brand, your company, and make sure that is in line with the vibe of your audience.
Yeah, I feel like that's so hard to get right. I think everyone's been talking about that forever. Didn't the Webster say authenticity was like the word of the year last year? I'll fact check myself, but I believe that. But It seems like a lot of brands haven't really taken that seriously because there's so much like inauthentic, just kind of garbage that I see on like,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess it's hard to get right because like whose authenticity, like I'm leading a small marketing team. What feels authentic to me might be a little bit different than one of my coworkers. So again, it's just tapping into your audience and what's going to resonate with them.
yep, makes sense. And then what does the marketing team look like? You mentioned a small team. How small are we talking? And then what does the general, kind of organizational structure look like?
Sure. My current team is about 10 people, and we have half of it, I would say, core marketing, like product marketing, content, demand generation, events. And then the other half is DevRel. So Edge Impulse, I should probably give a short description of Edge Impulse, but Edge Impulse is a software platform that helps developers build, optimize, and deploy machine learning models for edge devices. So that could be cameras, sensors, microcontrollers, small devices where you need sometimes to have intelligence on that device. And such interesting use cases, like there's a conservationist who's using Edge Impulse technology to basically use computer vision and track endangered rhinoceros based on their eye wrinkles. It's basically like a way to fingerprint a rhino is look at their eye wrinkles and you can identify different individuals and see, where they are and where they're going, that sort of thing. And the reason why DevRel reports to marketing at Edge Impulse is because our main audience is developers. So we need to have a really strong DevRel team. We need to have good documentation, an engaged forum. It's part of marketing and educating our audience. And that's why DevRel reports to marketing, is that it's a huge part of our marketing and company strategy.
How would you summarize your general approach to marketing?
My general approach to marketing is, it ties to my approach to leadership, which is empower the team. I view my role as setting the vision and the strategy, and of course, removing blockers, especially if there's organizational problems that need to be solved, but then trusting my team and listening to their ideas. So many times I'll be pleasantly surprised about an idea a coworker will bring to the table that I maybe never would have thought about. So all of our ideas and our input and our expertise together is going to give us a much better end product than if I just kind of dictated everything. That's too much work anyway.
Makes a lot of sense. Where'd you learn that leadership style from, do you think?
I really like this book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. Basically, she talks about different examples of great leaders, effective leaders, and some not so effective leaders throughout, corporate America in the past 20, 30 years. And she talks about how to be a leader that's a multiplier, where you're adding and enabling your team to do their best work rather than dictating everything and being a micromanager, which, if you're hiring smart, ambitious, capable people, they most likely will not respond well to micromanaging.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
I just looked that book up as you were speaking. I didn't realize, I don't know how to say his last name, but it's the guy who wrote Essentialism and Effortless. He's the author of that or co-author of that?
Yeah. McEwen or McEwen? Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I love those two other books. I didn't realize that he had another book. So that's a nice treat. Excited to dig into that.
Yeah. There's one other book that I think has been really pivotal in my approach to marketing, which is called Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's about growth versus fixed mindset. And basically, a growth mindset is the belief that a person's abilities can be developed through effort and persistence and learning, whereas a fixed mindset is more about, hey, my abilities are set in stone. For example, someone might be very capable, but they might take this identity of, oh, I'm really good at this. So anything that challenges their self-identity as being good at something could be a kind of an identity crisis. So a fixed mindset might blame others or external factors for failure rather than learning from the failure and improving and getting better. So there's all sorts of psychology that's tied into that. And the book goes into more details, but I try to emphasize in my own work and also with my team, how can we have a growth mindset? When something inevitably goes wrong, we make a misstep. We're humans, so sometimes we make a mistake. Or sometimes we try something and it just doesn't work. How can we learn from that, improve, iterate, and then try again? That's what I'm really focused on. And that's where you see real success.
When it comes to the marketing strategy and the tactics that you're leveraging, what's working right now and what's not working?
Yeah. Anything we can do to connect with our target audience more, some of that is virtual events like the webinars that we're doing. Also, since our audience is technical, our DevRel team does a lot to, write documentation, engage with our audience on the forum. We have a university program for kind of new upcoming student developers that are trying to learn how to use machine learning and build machine learning for edge devices. We have an expert network also where we kind of tap into the expertise of developers that are already using Edge Impulse, and we pay them for blog posts and other content that they're creating for us. So Edge Impulse really is all about developer audience and developer growth, and then also tapping into the professional developers. But I don't want to forget like the kind of bottoms up PLG motion with the students and those that are just learning, because students are future professional developers. So we have both kind of like a tops down, bottoms up motion going, as long as we're focused on that developer audience and connecting with them in ways that resonate with them.
If we look at AI, obviously there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of noise about AI, and there's just a lot of different AI tools that are out there. Are there any AI tools that you're currently experimenting with?
Yes. And I really do think AI is going to be transformative for marketing in the next few years. Content generation seems to be kind of like the hot area right now where you can use AI to generate content. Couple tools that I find interesting, Notebook AI. We were experimenting with that where we kind of trained the AI model on our own docs. So Edge Impulse, like a lot of companies, you have a lot of public facing information. We have a blog, we have a website, we have technical documentation, and we have our forum. All that information is publicly available. Anybody can access it. So we use Notebook AI to basically look at our documentation and then create podcast summary of a certain topic that we gave it, and actually blew my mind. It was totally AI generated. So, sorry to all the podcast leaders, Brett, but AI might be headed for this direction. I thought it was really good. We actually posted it on our LinkedIn channel if anybody wants to check it out, the Edge Impulse LinkedIn channel. But this podcast that's talking about a new technology that we're working on, and is very well summarized, and it made a lot of sense, and it was really compelling.
Yeah, that's one of those tools that it kind of hurt my brain. I was playing around with it for a few hours and, put it all in, and that audio that came out, I'm like, how is this possible? And like the two hosts, talk over each other and interrupt them just like a normal podcast. I just don't understand how it's even possible. It's really just
I know.
brain a little bit.
It does blow your mind. One other thing I'll mention too is HubSpot just launched Breeze, which HubSpot is a marketing automation tool. Breeze is their AI powered tools that just launched in September this year. So that might be worth checking out too. We're going to check it out and see what capabilities it has. I just think there's so much potential for AI in marketing.
I said I don't listen to a lot of marketing podcasts. There's an exception, and it's called Marketing Against the Grain. And it's the CMO and VP of Marketing from HubSpot. And they just like kind of geek out on AI. So I think it's a podcast. Cool. I don't listen to all of them, but every now and then I'll drop it and listen to them. And they're so good. There's so much fascinating stuff. And I think that they're going to figure out AI. Like if you're going to bet on anyone to figure out AI, like the HubSpot team is going to figure it out.
Yes. And they have the data to do it. That's a big, important part.
Yep. 100%. We're depressingly somehow already through 2024, or almost through 2024, mid-November here as we're speaking. As you're thinking ahead for 2025, what are the top initiatives or projects that you're going to really be focused on?
Just a side note, I probably can't answer that for Edge Impulse, so I'll just answer in general. But marketers should really have your sights on AI. So obviously don't toss aside the campaigns that are working or the basics. Keep those running. But if you can set aside a small portion of your budget and your time to experiment with AI content generation, maybe experiment with whatever marketing automation tool you're using and AI capabilities that they have, and then start by leveraging your public facing content. I think, if you get ahead of the game and understand what's happening with AI, I think that'll serve you well. One other company I recently connected with was Kalos. It's a KALOS. They're looking at optimizing your Google ad spend with AI. that's another area that's, would be great to have that optimized and automated with AI. I actually don't enjoy spending time in the nitty-gritty details of Google Ads. So there's a lot of potential. We're still in the very early stages, but my advice to marketers next year would be keep on top of that and see what's going on and experiment yourself to see what results you can get from it.
Amazing. I love it. Well, that is our final question. So we're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any marketers or any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with you, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Well, they can follow me on LinkedIn. Just Linda Watkins. That's my handle. Linda Watkins. I'm at Edge Impulse, and you can find me there.
Amazing. Linda, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.